What's up, everybody? So I've had some questions on some of my videos about the MOLOTOW markers that I use, acrylic markers for making paintings. And a lot of people say, oh, it's not a painting, it's like a drawing. Well, to me, it's great. And I love using them because I can get really precise lines. So I'm going to go through just a little bit about how I prep canvas, what I use for canvas, how I frame these, and how I actually use the markers and some of the troubleshooting that you might run into. Just as a point of reference, here's a few that I did this past week. So that one I did 2 weeks ago. This one I did, actually you'll see it as my avatar. I did this a long time ago. I need to touch that one up and then clear coat it. But the other ones I did recently. So as you can see, I've been using 9x12 panels, and I really like that size because I also am starting up a shirt printing company with one of my buddies. And so we'll be screen printing. So 9x12 is really good size for a shirt. Like this one right here will be a really cool screen print on a shirt. So this one too, it's a single color. So what I do use though is these canvas panels, and you can get them pretty inexpensively. Jerry's Artorama and other places. This 24 pack was, I think, $29. So you're paying a little over $1 a panel. You can also get these nice floating frames where basically people always wonder how to hang a panel. Well, you can glue this into the frame or use other adhesive to get it into the frame, and then you just need to wire it up on the back. These are a little more expensive. So this one I got also Jerry's Artorama, and this was, I think, $15 a frame. So you got to factor that in if you're going to sell one of these, because you know you've got 16 bucks in just on materials without even talking about the paint or anything else. So just consider that as you're going through this. So here's all the markers that I have, and I bought these in packs from Bombing Science. They do a great job of supplying, you know, street artists and regular artists too, but they also have spray paint for, you know, tagging and everything else. That's sort of what inspired these markers. They're acrylic. And you can get sort of that street art vibe with these. And I'll show you what the nibs look like. The nibs are the little parts that go into the inkwell, I guess, and that's what you actually can use to paint. And there's different shapes and sizes. So I'll show you those now. So these two I use quite often. This is the round tip and the pointed tip nibs, and these are 2mm and 1mm respectively. So there's the 1mm unused nib with an extra fine point, and then there's the 2mm round. You can get all these on Bombing Science as well. The next size up is the 4mm round. It's got a bigger container, and you can also get calligraphy tips, and there's other types that you can use as well, but I usually use just the round tip or the calligraphy tip. Then you have your largest ones, which are the 15mm, and that's what the tip looks like on there, and they've got new ones that you can put in as those dry out or if they get used up or frayed at the end. So I've got all these colors as well. So here's all my refill canisters, and you know, I basically got the basic colors, obviously black and white, and you can mix. They have empty ones that you can buy that you can mix in, which let's see, this is an empty one you can buy from them too. And I'll show you, they're pretty tricky to change out, and I'll show you what I do as my method. So this diagram here is nice and shows you the essentials of how this thing is designed. There's a pump system in there that draws ink into the nib, and you pump and it'll saturate the nib, and then you paint, and then pump, and then paint, and then you can refill the reservoir. These are, I wish I had this style where there's 2 screws. Mine only have 1, which means that I have to delicately get the pump action part out, and I'll show you how I do that. So I'll show you this on one that hasn't been used, so I won't get ink everywhere. So you've got your cap, you pull your cap off, there's your nib. When you want to replace a nib, it's really easy, you just pull it right out. All right, so there's the nib, replace it with another nib. Try not to get ink on the new nib. But like I was saying, this type that I have only has 1 screwable area, and they can be kind of tricky to get off. But there you go, so I got that opened up. And you'll see that this whole section is connected. Well, this is really just covering the pump action. So there's the pump action is in here, and there's not a second area for me to unscrew the whole pump, which would be nice. but I don't have that type. So here's what I'll show you. When you want to refill this, this is what you're going to do. At least this works for me. You can see this really small ridge right there. And so there's other methods of doing this, but I've found that taking this part out with
a set of pliers
is easiest, because this is going to get gunked up, and then you can see it sort of pull out and be really delicate with that. There's the whole pump action. So now I can fill this. Always do it over paper, because this stuff gets everywhere when you're refilling. So there's the pump action in there. So now I can refill it, and then I put that back in. Make sure it's seated pretty well. Then you can screw this back on. Make sure that's nice and tight. Put your nib in. And I'll show you how this, how the nib works on this new one, just so that you can see it. These are just like a spray paint can. There's a metal ball in there. So first you got to get the ink all mixed up. You will notice with these that if you don't do this, you'll get a lighter color and then a darker color, because the ink isn't totally mixed up. So you really want to make sure these are shook up. If you're going back to a painting the next day, the colors won't match if you don't shake them up. Okay, so here's the, you'll see the nib, and you're just gonna pressurize, and you'll see the ink starting to get into the nib. And you want to make sure your nib is fully saturated. And there you go. So now you can do that. I always have a piece of paper on the edge to dab on, just basically so I can get this saturated without going on the painting. And then also, if you get excess, I always have paper towels around. But basically, when you're doing your painting, you're going to want something over here separately. You can do it in a large area of the painting too, but you're going to want to do this just to make sure you're saturated so you get clean lines. So that is just a little tip of how I do it. The other thing is you can totally mix these colors and make your own colors. So that is easy enough to do. I would just say that once you do that, that nib is going to be that color. You can always reuse them and get them saturated with another color later, but honestly, it'll bleed through in your new colors. So I say, like, when you use an empty and you're making a new color, like, that's your new color that you're going to use with that nib and that canister. So that's at least the way I look at it. You can blend on the canvas too, which does work a little bit, but again, that ink from the previous color, if it's still wet, is going to get into your other nib, and you end up streaking at times with the old color on a new area. So it's a little tricky to mix. I'll show you how I prep a canvas and how I go about the rest of the painting. So here's the panel 9x12. It has gesso on it already, but you're going to want to coat this. As you can see, some of them have imperfections. So there's two ways to do this. Typically what I would do if I want a white background or a base is I would put that down multiple times. So shake them up, and then you're going to coat this multiple times in different directions in hopefully straight-ish lines. And as long as the new painting is going to have a lot of detail, that's fine. But you will see some streaks. I did one with the gray background the other day, and you'll see the streaks, but as long as your new painting is going to have a lot of color in it, you're not going to see them. Otherwise, what I would recommend is if you want a base on your panel, use an acrylic paintbrush, to be totally honest. It's going to look way cleaner and smoother, and then these will paint right over top. So for this one, we'll just do white. So get the nib nice and saturated with the white. I already shook this up quite a bit, and you'll see you want a pretty good amount coming out. And then I just run through them. I'll do multiple passes at this and try to keep, at least somewhat of straight lines. But you will see a little bit of streaking when you put the lines down, which is okay. But depending on what you're going for, you might want that kind of rustic vibe, or you might not. So I tend to be a little more let it ride, but it depends on who you are. So basically you can get this base down, but again, it's quicker and probably cheaper, to be honest, to just use a large acrylic paintbrush. What you don't want to run into is, like I did with the anchor, is I just got going and I forgot to coat the panel, and then at the end I had to go through and fill in the white in all the negative space. And it's just harder to get it to look really smooth. And it just takes a lot longer. So doing it up front is always nice. You've got a good clean base. What's also really nice about these markers is that they dry really quick. And you can easily see when it's dry too. If you've got a light anywhere close, you can look and see. And this is only a couple minutes later and it's almost fully dry. Typically they don't take more than 5 minutes to be dry enough to paint on top of. You'll run into lighter color going over a darker color. If it hasn't fully cured, then you will get some of the lighter color pulling some of the color from the darker color into the new color, which is a bummer. And then you need to let it dry. One method that I have on that is that you can finish the area with the darker colors that you want lighter colors going on top of. And once that's cured, spray the whole thing with a varnish. And then you can add your lighter colors over the varnish and then varnish everything when you're done. That's a good method. That way it's locking in the darker color below it. And then the lighter color is going to have a clean surface to be on and not have any bleed through. And this is the varnish that I use, Kamar varnish. So basically there's a bunch of details of how to do this properly, but about a foot away at an angle, horizontal pass, vertical pass, and you should have plenty on there. And then within about 2 hours, you can paint on top of it. So I find that a nice way of locking in those darker colors and then putting the lighter colors on top later. And it's a lot easier to use either an acrylic paintbrush or you could even use white spray paint, and just because this stuff's designed to work with spray paint. So white spray paint base, totally fine. So while that's drying, I'll just give you a quick note here. The refill extension I'm talking about, that gray right here, that makes it so much easier to take the whole pump action and take it right off the canister. So it looks like you can just buy those, which I didn't realize until I actually read through this whole thing. One other note is that these are not inexpensive markers. They are pretty expensive. You can get a bulk purchase of like a whole set, which is better than buying them one at a time. And it looks like the refill extensions are $2.49 each. And again, MOLOTOW stuff is really not cheap. So this painting is going to be circles, and I'll show you. Basically, you're going to want to do 2 layers to get these to really fill in. And you can see, they come through pretty thin the first time, and once that dries, then I can add to it. So if you give it a little bit and just touch the top, it'll give you decent coverage on the first pass, but typically to get a really solid color, you're gonna need 2. So there's a good start, and try to get decent coverage on the first pass. The first coat is dry, and typically I would be doing this color everywhere on the canvas that I'm going to be doing it for its first coat, then move to the next color, and then the next, and then I do my second coats last. I don't need it to go all the way to the edge because I'm going to be adding highlights, and then I'm also going to be putting a black liner around the outside. Keep in mind, if the first coat is still a little damp, you could end up pulling the first coat up with the nib. So you got to be careful about getting that second coat on something that's relatively dry and not dragging the color off the canvas below the nib. So a little bit of a lighter touch. When you pick a color, you have to make sure that you're going to have something to use for, especially your shadow, and that you've got something in your arsenal that's going to fit. In this case, I'm going to use and what's nice, these are all numbered, the 204 True Blue I'm going to use as the shadow. The light is going to be over here, and the shadow is going to be over here for this whole painting. So I'm going to use the True Blue as the shadow, and then I'm going to use the white as the highlight. And I do have a short of this one online right now of this process, so you can kind of see it's going to be very similar to this one as far as, all the squares first coat, then all the squares second coat, then I did all the black outlines, and then I did the clear coat. Also, I do tend to sign mine first, just because I'm going to build the image around it to kind of build it into the painting. And also, if you screw up your signature, the light's going to be over here, So I'm gonna get the shadow in here and just kind of keep it kind of fluid. Doesn't need to be a lot because the black outliner is going to cover up some of this anyways. And you can see some of that blue is coming through from underneath, so I need to get more ink on this and let it kind of drop on the canvas. But again, this is actually a real tight close-up here. This is a pretty small circle. So that's pretty good there. And you'll see how it comes together after the, yeah, I'll put a little touch there. You'll see how it comes together after the black outlines on it. And the black outline forgives all ails, or all errors, and covers up a lot of the perimeter stuff. And again, I use white on the top edge, so it just kind of looks very cool to me to have the white on the top edge. This one's a little dried out here. There we go. So I try to get it a little thinner on the edge there. All right, so that's pretty good there. So now we've got to let that dry, and then I'll put the black outline. I'm going to use the fine tip for this because, again, this is pretty small, but I think circles are really not my best, not my best shape, as you can probably tell. So this will allow me to kind of move along rather than using the 2mm, which is, you have to be pretty bulletproof with that to make sure that it's perfect. But we'll see how it comes out. All right, so I'm going to do the outline now. And depending on the shape, sometimes I rotate the image. But, you know, I'll give it a little bit of love on the perimeter. But again, this is a pretty small circle in the overall mix, and none of my stuff is very perfect, to be honest. And that will happen, that you just saw the ink splotted out there. If you get caught on the canvas, sometimes it'll do that. And there's gonna be a bunch of other circles around this, so I'm not too worried about that. But you really kind of got to follow the canvas and not let it pop like that. So that's pretty good. And there's people out there that have much better skill than I. But this is what I do. And if you end up with too much width on one side, it's not the end of the world. So you can see it's pulling up a little bit of the color below. So I gotta get more ink on the end of the nib. But part of the, I guess what's endearing about my artwork is that it's not perfect. But again, if you zoom out on this, you're not gonna see the little touches and stuff. So that's decent right there. And when you add a bunch of them up on the page, you're not gonna really see you're not going to see the imperfections on that as much, because again, this is about an inch. You can see the size of my finger. The other thing I'll say is that with this painting, all the negative space on this, I'm going to fill in with black. So that also will kind of hide these edges a little bit. There it is in context of the overall piece. So again, we were really zoomed in there. And I like having the imperfection of all the little lines where you can see that it's handmade rather than perfect. Everybody's different though. I also totally could have used a fine tip to do the highlight and the shadow, which would have made it a lot cleaner, but again, that's not really what I'm going for. Hopefully you liked this video. If you did, please like and subscribe. I really appreciate your support, and thanks again for watching.